Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 381 featuring Eddie Smith, VFX, more specifically FX artist over at Digital Domain. I have known Eddie for a while, and I've actually thought this would be a great podcast to have because he is kind of like the MacGyver of effects and does things that are just vaguely put in descriptions in scripts and has to figure out visually how to make them happen. We get into that quite a bit on the podcast. He is a big Houdini artist, and he sort of talks about that workflow and the benefits of doing things in Houdini. I thought that was a really good perspective for those of you who are interested in visual effects and understanding a little bit more about what that side of the business is and how to do actual effects like flame and smoke and different transitions or do the crazy things that Eddie does. So really happy to have him on. He's worked on a ton of films, including Mummy the Tomb of the Dragon, Emperor, Tron, Iron Man 3, Ender's Game, Beauty and the Beast, and a whole lot more. So super excited to have Eddie on to talk all about that. Okay, we don't have any events that we have announcements just yet, but I do want to let you guys know that V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max beta is out, and if you are, you can get a license. If you can get it if you have a license of V-Ray, and you give it a go and check it out. Of course, your feedback is always welcome, but there's lots of new stuff in there. Lots of new stuff. I'm going to mention a couple of them. We have Chaos Scatter, which was introduced, which we had inside of Corona, but now is inside of V-Ray. You can create entire forests with it, which is pretty cool. We also have V-Ray Enmesh. Enmesh, think of it more like a geometry, like a texture, where you'll be able to repeat things and bend things and do lots of things a little better. It's more versatile than just instancing, and it can do a huge amount of stuff using very little memory, especially sometimes much better and more efficient than displacement. But speaking of displacement, we do have actually displacements inside of decals now, which is really cool, and so you can do that. That's something that's interesting. And then we've also enhanced our V-Ray proxies quite a bit, so they actually have object hierarchies, and you can turn things off and on inside of the hierarchy of the proxy, which is pretty cool. So lots of new stuff to look forward to in V-Ray 6. So check it out. And before you start asking when is V-Ray 6 going to be available for my platform of choice, don't worry, they will be coming very, very soon. But check it out. Go to our website, chaos.com, for more information on joining the beta. If you guys want to know more about the podcast, you guys can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast, or you can go to chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch this podcast, you can always watch us. We're always featured on youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. If you guys have any feedback or ideas of guests or anything like that of that nature, you can always email us, labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 381 with Eddie Smith.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
How long have you been at DD now?
Just over 14 years.
14 years. Okay, so that's quite the career. I'd love to let our listeners know. So you and I have known each other for several of those years, of those 14 years. But what sort of got you into CG? Like, how did you start getting into visual effects, and what was this motivated you to get into doing stuff on computers and movies or whatever? What was the thing that motivated you?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I really didn't know a whole lot about visual effects. I wanted to be a computer programmer, so I went to UT in Austin to study comp sci for a year. And at that time, I was interested in doing more creative work like CG, right? But I had no idea what any of that meant. So that year, I think it was 2003, I want to say. The University of Texas at Dallas started they called it Art and Technology, and it was a CG degree it spanned a lot of different things like modeling, video game design, web design. They had a uh, motion capture lab actually on
Okay.
campus, which for at the time was like huge.
That's a big deal.
Um,
Yeah, those cameras were that was probably very expensive setup. You're right.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, so when I found out that existed, I transferred over to UT in Dallas
Okay.
and switched my my major to art and technology.
Okay.
And at some point we I believe at the time it's actually a little bit of a tragic story, but at the time there was the studio in Dallas called DNA Studios, and they were responsible for making Jimmy Neutron, which was like a big deal
Okay.
at the time. And they ventured into doing a film, and I think they made a film called Ant Bully. I think it was a CG cartoon. Um, Either way, the company didn't last. It was, and so a lot of the people that had worked at DNA, some of them, some of them obviously moved back to LA or wherever, you know, to whatever studios they ended up going to. Obviously, weren't a whole lot of options in Dallas at the time. But Garmin Hergstad,
Oh yeah, Garmin.
yeah, he was there, and so he taught. In the interim, he taught 2 semesters of Houdini at UTD. So I signed up and took both semesters. I took and so and I really loved it. I hadn't, everyone in our school was just, traditional, like just modeling. We didn't even have at the time we didn't use Nuke, just After Effects, I think.
Right.
So seeing something like Houdini, where it was capable of having like something like particles and procedural modeling and things like that, really blew my mind. This is a long time ago. This is back when RBDs were barely functioning. This is Houdini
Right.
8, I think, is what I learned on. So yeah, and then I got a internship at Side Effect Software, the creators of Houdini,
Houdini.
in Santa Monica. They have a Santa Monica office that at the time, they moved around. But so I had got an internship and drove out to LA and was there for like 3 or 4 months maybe before DD hired me on as a junior artist. I was on Mummy. What was it? Mummy 3.
Oh, it
It was
was with Rob. Was it Rob Cohen who did it?
yeah, that's right. Yeah. And
Okay.
so the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, or whatever I think
Uh huh.
what
It
it's
was
called.
in China, right? Or it was supposed to take
Yeah,
place in
yeah, it took
China.
place. Yeah, it took place in China. Yeah, that
Right.
was the same year as the Chinese Olympics too. That
Right.
was, I believe so. Yeah, so that was the first, and that was the spring of '08, I guess.
Okay.
So I moved to LA. I moved to LA in December of '07, and I got
Right.
hired at DD in the spring of '08.
Nice. So
Yeah,
that
and the
was your
rest.
first. I mean, you worked at. Did you work at DNA Studio? No, you didn't work at DNA.
I just was in
Okay.
college during the time
Right.
when
So
it. Yeah.
Garmin is interesting. Garmin. I work with him on Day After Tomorrow
Mm-hmm.
at TD. So he's an
That's right.
incredible person. Also an incredible musician.
Oh yeah, we Carl Coleman. Uh,
Yeah, of course.
he and I got the internship at the same time, and drove out um, caravan to LA from Dallas.
Uh huh.
Together when we were so
Nice.
yeah. So
Okay. So Mummy was your first feature film. I mean, obviously, I mean, was that? I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, you went from graduating, getting an internship at Side Effects, and then immediately getting DD. I mean, at the time, Houdini artists were a big deal. They still are. I mean, they're
yeah,
hugely in demand, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. I think that being a Houdini artist and being a um, knowledgeable of the software and also being a talented artist is still extremely highly sought after. It's very difficult to find, high caliber artists like that have that kind of, that are well rounded.
Yeah.
At the time, uh, Mummy was in delivery. They only had like 2 months left on the show,
Hmm.
so they hired us just to come on and just do whatever we could as junior artists, having no experience whatsoever.
Right.
And so we just worked really hard and just kept our heads down and just got whatever we were scared to death. We had no idea what was going on. We were kids. Um, but yeah, and after the show, I had no idea whether I would even be able to continue working after that. I had no idea what I was doing. I decided I was just going to, after the show ended. It was summer, and I lived on Venice Beach at the time. So I thought, well, I'll hang out on the beach and chill, and if I can't find more work in LA, then I'll just go back home, figure something out.
Right.
Um, but they called me back. CD called me back to work on. I think the second one was GI Joe.
Okay.
That's the first GI Joe movie. So at that point, it was pretty much, from there on out, it was pretty much solid booking, all
Consistent. Yeah.
consistent. Yeah. Until what, 14 years later?
Right. Right. I think the first film that we worked on together was probably Tron. I think that.
That sounds about right. And I think that
Yeah.
was the first. And I think that was the first. I don't know if it was or not, but I think it was the first film that we used V-Ray for, wasn't it?
First film. I
Right?
think it was the first film that used V-Ray. Commercials had been using V-Ray for a long time,
Yeah, I think that was
but
the
there was a
one. That was
big.
the big one.
It was
That
a
was the big one
big,
that
big
we.
push because it was like the biggest project that DD had ever done at the time. It was
Yeah, it
huge.
was. Yeah, I mean, especially for the time. I mean, even by today's standards, still be a lot. It's still a lot of work. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
lot of shots to be the primary vendor on.
Hmm.
And I feel like today there's a lot more broken out and a lot more segmented and like. But at the time, that was a boatload of shots, right? And yeah, we had I guess because of like all of like the glass and all of the reflective like um, vehicles and everything, planes and everything that we had to do, and all the glowy bits and all that stuff. We had decided. 'Cause I think up until that point, I think a lot of it was renderman.
Yeah, it was
Or at
RenderMan.
least
I
I
think
know.
there was some Mental Ray as well that
Yeah,
was
I
being
know that.
used.
Yeah,
But RenderMan was the primary one. And then eventually V-Ray became like the primary one. Now I think you guys are split into a bunch of different renderers. But I
yeah,
think I remember you as a Houdini artist, you had a hilarious line because you didn't necessarily uh, uh, you didn't necessarily use Maya that much because you were a Houdini artist, and he said, "Oh, I love Maya. It's how I get to use V-Ray."
yeah,
It was pretty funny.
yeah.
Yeah.
We still we are still using V-Ray though,
Oh
pretty
yeah.
heavily. Yeah.
Yeah. I know you guys are.
And I know
I know you
for
guys are.
now, yeah, the
Uh,
project I'm on now, I think we're trying to potentially use it in Houdini. Cool.
yes.
Cool
So
vehicle.
there is a V-Ray for Houdini that we've been working very hard on, and mainly because of the big push with Solaris that's going on, and that's
Yeah.
sort of a really interesting thing. What are your thoughts about Houdini's changes over the years and how it's sort of now looking? It's almost looking like it's trying to become much more mainstream in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think they do. I mean, I think that obviously I've kind of been locked away in my you know in my position, my role. You know what I mean? I haven't really had a lot of opportunities to venture out much from what it is that I do, right? But
Right.
obviously they've we've always known that Houdini has been really would be really good for a lot of things, right? Um,
Hmm.
Related to like the video game industry, um, environments, a lot of things that people don't really think about how much more powerful Houdini is to do certain things, like video games, even MoGraph, even even a
It's
lot of
becoming
people,
pretty big in MoGraph right now, actually.
yeah, and I always thought, I like that kind of stuff. I like that kind of design and things like that. A lot of what I've done, even in the film world, has been a lot of, sometimes it's similar type stuff. You know what I mean? I worked on Tron and Pixels, and I recently worked on Fantastic Beasts, and there's been a lot of stuff that I've done. But a lot of it is kind of creative in that way, in that MoGraph kind of way, where there's no,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? It's a kind of it's otherworldly, and it's kind of, unique. Um, even like going back to Tron, where um, where they were building like the light cycles, and the light cycles
Hmm.
would come out and they'd be these lines that would like trace the whole bike, and the bike would fill in, right?
Right.
Even that kind of stuff, right? So we always knew that it would be really really good for these things. And I think that the learning curve for Houdini was so steep,
Yeah.
and I think perhaps the cost as well was prohibitive, or just it just put people off. You know what I mean? I think the
Hmm.
learning curve especially, and I think that now they haven't changed Houdini a whole, they haven't changed how it operates, how it functions, like the soul of
Sure.
Houdini or anything. But I think that they have made leaps and bounds to try and make it more accessible, both in probably price, I would imagine, but also like, you know, developing tools that are make it easier for people who have never used it to understand and pick things up and start to get a foothold on certain things. Whereas before, I think it was, it's always been super powerful and kind of, but almost like a sandbox. You know, what I mean, it's open to you, right? You have all this
Sure.
ability to do these things, but in doing so, it becomes hard to build things up to figure out how to accomplish things. So I think that they worked really hard to make things to where you didn't have to have so much deep knowledge in order to get up off the ground, right? And I think that combined with shortened schedules over the years, over the last, even since I've been working, the last 14, 12, like maybe a dozen years, time, schedules have been compressed. I mean, there's a lot more work to do, and there's a lot shorter amount of time to do it, right? So I think that also having those kinds of tools to like jump start, like, hey, this will get this done. Just, you know, um, just use this setup, just use this shelf tool, just use this, you know what I mean? And getting into the finer, whatever you want to call it, um, minutia, whatever the fine points of Houdini is something that comes later, I think, right? Whereas when I
Right.
learned Houdini, it was very like base. We started very very modular and small. You know what I mean? Figured it
Right.
out, and then things got more complicated. You built them up, right?
Right.
It used to be that it would take months to design and make a setup to do something specific. Like when we were doing, like going back to Tron. I'm just using Tron because you and I both worked on it, and also it was a very long time ago, or like seemingly it was a very long time ago now.
It was a long time ago.
But
2009, I believe.
yeah, breaking people into cubes like that, into tens of thousands of cubes like that, at the time was massive. I think a lot of people forget that, we didn't have pyro solvers and flip solvers and um you know you know bullet driven RBD systems, when we had to create our own bullet.
Right.
um at DD we created, it was called drop. We had to,
Right.
in order to do certain things like that. Today, with the VDBs um, and bullet native RBDs and Houdini, like some doing and point deform nodes. I mean, we had to have very centric point deformers that we had to write ourselves. So
Right.
in order to break people apart into cubes back then, was huge. It was huge undertaking. It took months to design the systems and the setups to handle all those characters breaking into cubes and have them have them deforming and then breaking apart and still being able to animate and stuff. And today that would be, I mean, you're talking, weeks to set something up, to get something the same caliber, the
Right.
same kind of So I think that's why it's become more and more popular, because the tools and things have advanced to where people don't. It doesn't take so much effort to get things done like that.
Right. So some of our listeners may not, may be new to the industry or may not necessarily be in VFX, and they may not actually know what Houdini is for, like what
Yeah.
you use it for. So you're obviously I've known you've always been doing like really really obviously very much on the effects side of things, right? So when we say effects and visual effects, that's like people breaking up into cubes or
Yeah.
or a big fluid sim or an explosion or things of that nature, right? But
Yeah.
explain a little bit, like give people an idea of like what's it like to work in Houdini, like what's it different from other 3D packages, and how does it sort of respond in that way? So it gives them a good idea about
So
that.
yeah. So for that might not be entirely certain what effects all encompasses, um, I like to describe it in a way like I like to describe it as anything that's animated, anything that's CG that's animated that's not a character or a vehicle is typically handled by effects. So and that can be all kinds of things, right? On It can be typical things that you think of when you think about effects, like explosions and pyro, fire, smoke, you know, natural phenomena like lightning and tornadoes and clouds and things like that, atmospheric. But it can also be, more specific, kind of one-off type stuff, right? Like things like, in fact, um, I don't want to give any spoilers for people who haven't seen Fantastic Beasts. Trying to think of something more big, but in
I remembered when you were doing, I don't remember the show, but it was a show you did it was a one-off, very specific, and it was super complicated. And it was someone's face changing with nanomites or something like that to another person's face.
that's a good example. Yeah, so a long time ago, it was on the second GI Joe movie. I was and the president of the
Right.
United States, who was played by um, David Price, I believe,
Okay.
and then the dude who played Emotep from the first Mummy movie. I don't remember that guy's
Right.
name, but yeah, he was the bad guy, right? And I think Price was playing the actual president of the United States,
Right.
and they had like these nanomite technology that's like teeny tiny robots, um, and they do all kinds of things, right? They're like a cure all for technology doing something, right? But
Right.
one of the many things they could do, right, was to conceal a person's identity. So you had Price, and and then they kidnapped him. I guess they kidnapped the president, and then the bad guy, he used the nanomites to turn his face into
The president.
the president's face, so he can impersonate the president. And so
Right.
there's a clip where he's confronting one of the GI Joes, and he wants to show him that he's the bad guy. He's not really the president of the United States. You know what I mean? But it's
Mm-hmm.
it's too late, because they've figured it all out. They've got
Right.
they've got the upper hand. So he goes and he takes a knife and he cuts his own face, and so he splits his skin open all the way down the side of his face. And when he does, it opens up, but instead of having flesh underneath, it's these metallic nanomites, right? And they all the nanomites that are keeping him incognito, they rush to 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 seal the face back up. So when they rush, they uncover his face up until like here, so they can
Right.
repair the knife, the cut in where it was, right? And once they repair it, they all move back and transform his face. So it reveals the one actor's face, the President Price's face, into the
Right.
bad guy's face. So he's like, he gives a little like wink, like I'm the bad guy, and then
Right.
all the nanomites kind of go back, right? So there's like a metallic kind of like leading edge, and they kind of they morph his face, so his face has like an animated blend shape, right?
Right.
So something like that would be handled in Houdini, right? So the 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 two blend shapes, right, between the two faces, right,
Mm-hmm.
is procedurally generated, right, by the crawling of these nanomites that are over the surface of his skin. So yeah, that would be a good example of something that's like a character driven type effect that's not typically thought about when and when you think about effects. And we do a lot of that, right? Like there's a lot of things like things you
What's
don't think of. Yeah, go
what's
ahead.
cool about it is that like I don't know how much description you were given to do this. Like did they describe exactly what it was like, and or what is it? They have any reference frames of what it needed to look like? I mean, like you had to invent a lot of stuff to make it look right, right?
Yeah, I mean sometimes sometimes we have concept art,
Right.
right, from the art department. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes they don't have that. Sometimes they want you to kind of figure it out. There's a lot of being an effects artist. I think especially now, I mean, back then somewhat too, but now especially so, you have to develop a lot of things somewhat out of thin air a lot of the time. You know what I mean? A lot of
Yeah.
things you have cues. You can look at other movies like, you know, forming Black Panther suit or doing, things that are established. Like how Thor's electricity, like things like that. Like they have kind of set looks that you can go off of. So if
Sure.
somebody comes to you with that, like, but I mean, a lot of times, a lot of times movie makers want something that is new and creative, or something that somebody's never seen before, or something they want to design something that's going to impress and be really cool. And a lot of times, people don't have, I mean, they have an idea of what they want, but sometimes they don't know what that is. So being
Yeah.
an effects artist, you have to build out certain looks, try different kinds of things and present them. Um, and kind of, you're kind of in a way, sometimes you have to make your own way. You have to find your own path as to what the thing's going to look like. And it can be difficult, especially, um, but with experience, you get used to how things are built up, how things are presented. You know what I mean? Like common ways to like get to from A to B, right? So if I were cutting that guy's face open now and doing something like that, I would probably be able to get there a lot faster, because
Sure.
I would have a better understanding of what it takes to do those kinds of effects, and the more experience you have, the more the easier
Yeah.
that becomes. But
For sure. I think what's interesting also is just the idea. I remember I was working on some. I was supervising a commercial. This is before I went back to DD for Tron, but I was, and there was a description. It was a car commercial, and they said, "Well, the sunroof." Oh, the description was written like this in the script. It's like the sunroof open, and a vortex comes out of the sunroof. Right? I'm like, vortex.
yeah,
It turns out everyone's idea, it seems like a clear word, but everyone's idea of what a vortex looks like is
yeah,
completely different. Some people had these straight lines, some people thought like a tornado, or like everyone had a different idea. They pretty much had a conical shape, but what it did and how it acted was completely different. And I know that that's like you probably get some of those situations where they'll describe something and there's not an actual visual, because you're right, you have to do something no one's seen before.
yeah.
And often,
Well,
right?
yeah, and I mean, like a lot of times, you can also uh, start simple. You know what I mean? Build it up from something simple, right? Get a few ideas out there and show them, right? And
Right.
just build them up very quickly and very, you know, modular, procedural, not invest a ton of time into the finer details and get something out there, right? That's a lot of times what
Sure.
we have to do, and then you can build on it, right? They'll see something, and when they see something, then you can move forward to the next step, and then do more work on it, and then move to the next step. So yeah, it's a lot of work, and it is something that gets a lot of these kinds of effects that are, I mean, even traditional effects like explosions, you know what I mean? They all have a process, you know what I mean? Starting very large and adding finer details and extra debris, and you know what I mean, and shock waves and secondary dust and things like that.
Mhm.
So it's always built up, but you have to make sure that you're going in the right direction, right? So maintaining the right direction, but also making things more complicated and building up more detail and making them look cooler, right? Um, it's just a step by step process, um, and it can be difficult, especially in more creative things like, um, yeah, I mean, trying to think of a very good example. I have a good example. It's a really recent movie, and I don't want to ruin it for those who have perhaps.
Oh, don't worry about it. Look, the people will tune out. Like if
We can earmuffs.
tune out for the next one.
We can earmuffs. We can earmuffs. So,
Okay, earmuffs. It's for those who are worried about it.
Those of you who don't want me to ruin the latest Fantastic Beasts movie.
Okay.
All right, now is the time for earmuffs. So there's a scene in it where Newt's briefcase that he carries around all the time. Have you seen the movie?
No, but
or
that's
any
okay.
of them? Or any of them?
I have seen them. Yes, I saw the first.
Okay, so great. So he's got a suitcase, his magic suitcase. All his creatures inside. His laboratory's inside. So there's a scene where he seemingly the suitcase seemingly is destroyed, right?
Okay.
And when we went to go do it, it was very open ended, right? So similar like what you just said. There's a vortex, right? Mm-hmm. Vortex comes out the sunroof, So it was very open ended as to they had an idea of how it was going to dissolve or break apart or do something to be destroyed, seemingly be destroyed and fly away, right? They had shot it. They shot everything, right?
Okay.
We had plates. It was not, also. And
right.
so I had to sit down and figure out a way to make this suitcase kind of come apart in a unique, cool way that was, magical, right? Kind of fit into a Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts type world, but also was not something that was, it was a little atypical, something more specific to the movie. And in a case like that, you have very little to go off of. You have to just kind of quickly mock something up and show it, and get some direction, right? And if it's something that they like and something that they think is cool, then you can start building on it, right? So setting up the suitcase, I tried to set up the suitcase as quickly as possible, right? So we could show them something of it coming apart and flying away. But yeah, very little initial direction, right?
Sure.
The idea and how it operates, we had kind of come up on our own. But then as soon as they see it, they obviously were, they either had positive or negative, feedback, and they were like, hey, yes, this, not this, you know what I mean? And then you can start going in the direction, right? Is working and collaborating with them and them being like, oh, it needs to be thinner, break apart more pieces. I like what you're doing here. This is a good idea, right? Like, don't do this. We don't want it to be like this, right? We definitely don't want it to be like this, right? So getting that kind of feedback is it's a process. And obviously Houdini makes it to where, you're able to do that, right? Because in a lot of other softwares that aren't built out procedurally like this, it would be prohibitive, right? Like you would spend a ton of time getting an idea together, and it would take a lot more manual work instead of being able to set something up a little bit more procedurally just to show it off, and get some feedback. So you would just doing the initial test might take a lot of effort for something that they might be going the wrong direction. Right. So, Houdini does a good job of that. And then, like I said, like a lot of the manual work, like some of the finer details, it does get down to where it's locked down, and you do need to do finer stuff. That's less procedural. But at that point, you've narrowed it down so much with the client and with feedback that you're just putting the final touches on at that point. So,
right.
Yeah. So Houdini is really great. It's for those people that may not be aware, it's a node-based software. Like
node-based. Yeah, that's I was going to sort of let people, like try to explain. It's very weird. Like I've always been, before I went into VFX, I never really worked with node-based software at all, because even when I was doing compositing, I was using After Effects and it was layer-based, and I was presented with Nuke, and it's like, here's this slate, and you sort of build up all these nodes and connect them, and it was completely confusing at first, and then once you get it, it's like, oh, why is everything not like this?
Yeah, I think that's how it is. Yeah, I'm the same way. I learned with Maya. I learned with After Effects.
Right.
And I had no idea what node-based softwares even were. No idea. I mean, you get a little bit of like when I was young and I was using like the Hypershade, and you have things hooked up in a way that kind of flows. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have an idea, but Houdini was a big was a was was a it was mind-boggling when I first saw it, and
Right.
um and then same thing when I was introduced to Nuke after having been introduced to Houdini, and when I
Okay.
saw Nuke, I was like, oh yeah, this makes so much sense because it's same kind of thing, right?
Right.
Um, it's it's visual, it's visual programming in a way, you know what I mean? You're applying what you're applying is happening in a linear uh, manner. It flows, you know what I mean?
It's
Um,
fairly technical as well. It's very
yeah, I mean
technical.
it can be, yeah, it can be. I mean it can be really technical, and it can be, I think especially now it doesn't have to be quite so technical. I mean, it does if you want to get down into it and you need to make changes and be really specific. I mean, like the Fantastic Beasts, the effect I was talking about regarding
Mhm.
Fantastic Beasts. I mean, that was fairly technical because a lot of it was procedurally done. Like it wasn't like not a lot of it was sims, right?
Right.
A lot of it was built out, um, and so um, it can you can get into the weeds for sure. But I think today, especially, if there's a lot of people who like, and that's why I think it's like more popular. Is like even people in commercials, you don't have to have a real solid grip on the software, really know all the fine details in order to get get an explosion out there, or do some missile trails, or you can do whatever it is that, or make a maybe a car vortex is a little bit more difficult, but maybe
Sure.
not by a huge amount, And if all you got to do is get a a vortex looking, spirally looking thing coming out the sunroof to get this commercial done,
Yeah.
then you don't necessarily have to know everything there is to know about Houdini. Nobody
Right.
knows everything there is to know about Houdini. I would never claim. I mean, it's an impossible feat. It's just
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had, you know who Judith Crow is?
Yeah, absolutely. Judith was working at Side Effects when I was an intern, actually.
Yeah. So she was just on the podcast, actually.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't talked to Judith in a long time, but yeah, of course.
Yeah. So she's really cool. And she sort of talked a little bit about it, but, what were some of your, I mean, obviously, I always remembered you doing those cool one-off things like you, and it like, and I always used to remember seeing you like both extremely frustrated and extremely excited at the same time because it's a
Yeah.
challenge, and it's a creative challenge, it's a technical challenge, and it's like I don't know how I'm going to get this done or whatever it is, and it's always exciting. But what were some of your favorite ones that you'd worked on? I mean,
Oh
you mentioned
man.
obviously some of the Tron stuff, and you mentioned Fantastic Beasts, but what were some of the ones you really were cool for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, and honestly, I'm gonna have to look at see what I've actually worked on. I'd tell you the truth, it's really that bad. But yeah, a lot of the times I've worked on a lot. I've worked on all kinds of things. You know what I mean, from big effects to small effects. But you're right, I have done quite a bit of one-off stuff, especially like like a lot of character effects where the guy's cutting his face would be an
Right.
example of that, right? I've also done I mean, I think on Ender's Game, I did we had the little doctor, I guess it was, like the doomsday device, you know what I mean, that's gonna win them
Uh-huh.
the war. They shoot the laser beam into the Formic planet, into the
Hmm.
aliens planet, and so when it impacts, it immediately creates a chain reaction where it sends a shockwave all the way around the entire planet, and it's like burning the whole planet and leaving like a husk, like a
Right.
a destroyed remnant of the planet in its wake. So I did that. That was a lot of fun. Um, like I was on Terminator Dark Fate and doing a lot of
Hmm.
liquid metal type stuff, which was fun, helping to dev that out and get that working.
Right.
Having his arms turn into blades, you know what I mean? That
Yep.
was pretty cool. But a lot of times there's like small things that I work on that are seemingly they're minor things, but they're a big part of the movie, and Um, they add a lot to it, and a lot of people don't think about it, right? Like on Terminator, there was a scene where they're fighting inside of a cargo jet that's like flying in the air, and there's a big hole ripped in the side of it, so there's
Right.
air inside the ship. So there's all these like exposed wires and cables inside the ship, and there's like padding up against the wall, and it's all kind of coming loose, and it's vibrating, and it's like fluttering, and there's like cables moving, and it's all very quick. And just setting up stuff like that, like the bent metal rattling and all the stuff that makes it look like there's high energy and that they're
Yeah.
up in the, those kinds of things can be really big tasks, and they're not necessarily like hero type things, but they're things that like are interesting and take a lot of work and a lot of setup, and they have a big payoff because once you got them set up, you can just run them in all the other shots, and it just
Right.
really makes things like come together. Done all kinds of stuff. Let's see.
I think that's a really good example because I think that people don't even realize that stuff gets done, right? And how.
Yeah. And how much goes into those kinds of things.
Yeah.
On Ready Player One, that was another fun one I did. Like Ready Player One,
Yeah.
we worked on that show with ILM, and ILM was doing all of the video game world.
Okay.
Right. So all the CG, like the hyper stylized CG, like beautiful like game world, and then we were doing all of the real world stuff. So like all of the stacks, like the massive like environment where all of the trailer homes are all stacked up together.
Right.
And we were also responsible for these boot suits that they wore. Right. So I was doing like
oh right.
So it's like the haptic suit that they do. So they put on the goggles and they have a haptic suit. So I was working on designing like the mechanism, like they had these little cubes, like it was layered. They had like a tight suit, and then they had these little squares, and then another layer of like clear plastic over that, and then these like ribs that went over that. And so whenever they would get hit, they would grip, like the cubes would grip, and then there would be like even a shock wave that would like ripple out from the impacts, right? So like literally sending ripples through their body and like gripping these things, and having like there's a moment where they're Parzival, the main character, and the gals, they're having a moment where they're dancing, and she's
I remember.
She's sexy times feeling them up. So like we had to like take a hand and like move her like hand down his body, right? And it was like lightening, you could see like a handprint like lighten up his haptic suit, and like it was all purple, and like so like doing the dev for like all that kind of, so that's like kind of the one-off stuff that I would do. And whenever he gets hit or something happens, it activates, it has all these crazy like little tiny details, all these little lines that kind of like emanate out and kind of run down his body and through the cubes, and in between them and the cubes they grip, and then they release as her hand moves. So all of that kind of stuff. A lot of character effects. I've done a lot of that in the past. A lot of Captain Marvel energy that goes over her body that she she uses to beat Thanos up, stuff like that. So
that's awesome. I think it's great. I think a lot of people who haven't don't know about that kind of world would be really kind of interested in all the cool stuff that you guys are doing. What are your thoughts about obviously 14 years at DD, you've seen a lot of growth. You had to build a lot of things from scratch before, and you don't have to do that as much anymore, or there's more tools at your convenience. But what do you think about the growth of where that's been, and also the demands of the industry? Like, how has the industry changed over 14 years for you? What are your thoughts about that?
As far as the way the industry's changed, I mean, I think that like certainly now, like I was saying before, I think that one of the biggest driving factors is that there's so much to do, especially since COVID, especially, which the last, but I mean, I think for me, even the last like 5 or 6 years, maybe, so not quite half the amount of time, but like getting close to about half that amount of time, has really ramped up in the amount of work that is required to get done, and the schedule in which it has to get done. So all the schedules vary. Um, have been set up quite a bit. I mean, I remember when we were working years ago, I mean, it wasn't uncommon for projects to last a year and a half, even longer sometimes. And now, I mean, I think a 9 or 10 month project would be a very long, like considered a long project, right?
Right.
It's a big difference. I mean, that's huge. I mean, that's an extra 6 months. I mean, that's a lot. And so it just keeps getting, and sometimes quicker, sometimes 3 to 6 months. You know what I mean? Who knows, right? It just depends on what kind of project it is, and when they need to get it done. And I think finding the people and having it staffed up is becoming more and more difficult, and then having all of these deadlines. I think it's just the speed of the industry that's the biggest change, I think.
And you say that's in the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, I would say like 5 or 6 years. I think for me personally, that's how it feels, right?
Right.
I feel like it's been ramping up in that amount of time.
And has the amount of shots also gone up, or is it still,
Yeah, I think that, yeah, it's the amount of shots and certainly the amount of projects, right?
Right.
I mean, when we were, a long time ago, it was 3 projects was a ton, right?
Right.
So we were working on simultaneously. Sometimes, 2 was just enough, right?
Right.
But having now it's, 7, 10, more.
Wow.
For some studios. For some, I know this is just for DD. I mean, for some studios, I mean, I know there's even more than that for sure.
Right.
And it's just a lot to manage, right? I mean, it's just a lot to account for and a lot to manage, right? Like,
yeah.
So managing resources and making sure everything's staffed up the way it needs to be in order to get all these shows done all simultaneously. So it's a lot bigger of a challenge now than it used to be. Because it used to be you only had to worry about this and this, right?
Right.
But with more and more, it becomes harder and harder to gauge everything and to keep everything balanced and keep everything stacked and appropriately. So yeah.
I mean, I guess that's good for the work, right? There's a lot of work out there.
There's a lot of work out there for sure. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to get done. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that's changed is just that kind of the pace and the amount, and just trying to keep on top of it, make it where it's doable in a reasonable amount. Do things in a reasonable amount of time, get them done, staff it up, things like that.
Right. How you mentioned COVID. I mean, how did COVID affect you or affect the work in some ways? I mean, I don't really know if it had a huge effect, or did it in terms of?
I mean, we kind of kept working pretty seamlessly. I mean, obviously there were some issues, especially early on, and then when we went to, I mean, the day that we had the shutdown, I'm in Los Angeles, and the day that we had the shutdown in LA, it was March 13th, Friday the 13th. Yeah. We literally just packed up, we packed up our equipment, our monitors, our, the stuff that we needed to connect remotely. And for us, we had already had, because we have locations in different areas, like in Montreal and Vancouver and Los Angeles, we already had a centralized remote facility, right, where all of our machines were anyway, right?
Right.
So all of our machines were already centrally they were all centrally localized, located. So we just basically moved what we were already doing in an office just to our homes and connected the same machines, right? So there was a huge, it was a huge technical challenge, you know what I mean, initially to get everything up and running. But we managed to get by and do it, just like we're doing now over Zoom, just like everybody else. I think there were some pros and cons. I mean, obviously not having to commute to work, and especially in a city like Los Angeles, big deal, right? I mean, I know you for a very long time. Had a
a long commute.
Yeah, that's a long commute. I know that you did.
I get 2.5 hours back of my day, buddy.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I have
exactly.
no
And
desire to go back.
and that's true for a lot of people, right? So I think that that's good. But a lot of people do really, really well working from home. I mean, a lot of people do more work from home. They work better. Some people don't. Some people have a hard time. Some people don't like it. Some people don't like not having a sense of, they feel like they're losing a sense of community. There's definitely a lack of, the hardest thing for me is like the lack of like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Interaction.
Yeah. Working together.
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Thank you. It's the lack of collaboration, right? It's becoming more, we have different people working on different projects, and that's becoming more and more and more, like with more projects and being work from home, I feel like people are becoming more and more disjointed, right? Like you don't know what people are doing on this show. You don't know what people are doing on this project. I mean, kind of on your own show, on your own project. And it used to be when we were in office, there was a lot of collaboration. People could see what everybody else was working on. Oh, are you having a problem? Like you were saying about me getting really frustrated sometimes when I would try to solve like large problems.
Right.
Whenever you get angry like that, you get upset. You're trying to crack the code, and you have people around you that are like, well, what's your problem? Like what are you dealing with? Like, oh, have you tried this? Have you tried that? You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. Oh, like, hey, send me that file. Like, let me take a look at it. I might be able to like, maybe come up with. I got an idea. You know what I mean? And there's a lot less of that now. So I think for people who are extremely experienced, who are senior artists that have been around forever doing it, they don't need, it's less necessary for them. But I think for a lot of people who are just in the industry, trying to find their feet, trying to get acclimated to this kind of work, basically build up what you and I just described, like, the things that you learn over time. And with that kind of experience, you're able to tackle these things a lot more efficiently, and you know how to approach it. Even like really complicated, weird things like, a suitcase dissolving, or a guy's face getting cut, or or a person turning into cubes, or whatever it may be, right? Those things can only be done if you've collaborated and learned and picked things up from other people. Everything that I do, you know what I mean? It all stems from something, probably, that I learned from somebody somewhere.
Right.
So, if you don't have that person to help, that connection to all these other artists in an office, then it becomes difficult. That's the biggest problem that I think.
Yeah, it's probably the juniors that are suffering the most through that process, I'm sure.
Sure, and and it's, you can only do so much. You know what I mean? But I mean, it is fine. I mean, we got Zoom. I can remote log into people's machines. We can talk it over. We can take a look. We can still do those kind of things. But it's still difficult.
Right. Right. Where do you think it's going to go? I mean, do you think that are you guys doing more of a hybrid, or are you guys working from home still, or?
Right now, I think we're all still working from home. I know some people are in the office for sure.
Okay.
I know that there are people in the office, because both in like Vancouver, Los Angeles, I've seen them in the office. Like remotely, I can see them in the office.
Right.
And I have not gone back to the office, but I think that it's hard to say, especially for DD anyway. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know what that's going to be. I mean, I think for other companies, I think it might be, they've already made certain decisions, you know what I mean, moving forward, right?
Yep.
But for us, it's a little bit more complicated, you know what I mean? I think that's true for a lot of other companies. Maybe hybrid, yeah, maybe. I don't know how you. I mean, it would be really hard for me to imagine, after all this time, that this won't have some kind of lasting effect. It's just really hard for me to understand that. Like, I don't think that. I mean, right? I mean, you can't possibly go back to the way things were, and just. I mean, even if you did go into the office 100%, you can't pretend like something like this is not beneficial and viable to a certain degree, right?
Right.
You need a lot less office. You need less office space. You need less you need less. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, like with
Yep.
with working from home. So I think that, and DD has grown since then. You know what I mean? DD has grown a lot since before COVID. So
Yeah.
I think that um, yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I would
Less
imagine
real
that,
estate sounds like a good thing.
yeah.
It's a big
Well, in Los
cost.
Angeles, it definitely is, and
Yeah.
Vancouver to boot, I guess. Well, I guess everywhere. Yeah, basically everywhere. Yeah, but yeah, I have no clue, Chris. I have
Yeah.
no clue how it's going to affect us, but I would imagine it would have to have some kind of long-lasting effect. But I guess we'll find out. For the time being, though, I'm still sitting here working at home.
Yeah. Is there anything you're looking forward to? Things that are coming up that are exciting you?
Yeah. I mean, we're working. I mean, we're working on more than we ever have before.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of film, a lot of television as well. More
Right.
television, I think, than we've ever worked on for sure. I mean,
And
I think
streaming. Basically, you mean streaming stuff, or is it mostly?
streaming. Yeah, I think it's all streaming.
Right.
I think it's all streaming. It might not be. I'm not entirely certain about all that.
And the
Don't hold me to
effects in the
that.
streaming stuff is as complicated as big film projects as well.
Oh
In
yeah,
a
I
lot of
mean,
ways.
you're talking about shows like Marvel shows like WandaVision,
Yep.
shows like Stranger Things and stuff. I mean, they're no joke. They want it. It's got to be high end. It's got to look good, man. They're
Yeah.
not joking around. So we got yeah, and I mean you got
Short schedules too.
I mean and huge amounts of work sometimes. I mean like
Yeah.
a film is only an hour and a half, 2 hours long, and
Right.
we're looking at 9 episodes that are all 40 minutes, 30 minutes, hour long.
Right.
It's like a six hour movie. Like it's
Right. Yeah.
there, it's massive, and it's still a high caliber of work has to get done for them. We've definitely
Right.
this is definitely the most work I think we've ever done for sure since I've been working at DD, and probably ever. I would imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to a lot of stuff. There's a lot of cool work to be done, and we're doing more and more different things simultaneously, right? It used to be that a long time ago you didn't get to work on working on a show with like a lot of water. You didn't get to
Mhm.
really do. You might go 10 years without working on a show without water, or you know what I mean, or
Right.
oh, you've just been doing shows that have like a lot of this or a lot of that, right? Um, you get kind of pigeonholed in a way, and
Yeah.
but nowadays I think it's just so there's so much to do and it's so prevalent that you got to do all kinds of different stuff all the time. You know what I mean? You can't go very long without running into certain things that you have to do. So
Yeah.
that's cool. But yeah, we got a busy year, 2 years coming up. So
All right. Well, that's exciting. That's exciting. I'm happy for you guys, and certainly love the work. I thought it would be really great to talk to when I saw the reason I connected with you obviously is, as you know, is that I saw on LinkedIn that you've been a DD for a long time, and so I was like, we should have Eddie on, because I think Eddie you've always had these great projects and great cool things you've done, and I think people should know of, like, there's that specialist, the MacGyver guy that figures it out.
I think they're becoming less and less there's less and less of them, I think, as the years continue to go by. But yeah, I would say that has definitely been a thing for me, is doing things like these random things, even when I was very early on in my career, like doing like Transformers, where we had to do that Reed Man with a little thin guy that got built out of all those little tiny robots. And
Oh, right, I remember that.
Yeah, pops out. You know what I mean? And things like that. I was doing things like that, kind of these weird, kind of one-offy type things, pretty early on, and always have had some strange thing I've always had to do, right? And like I said, I think that's why people just turn to Houdini a lot of times in those cases, right? They're like, oh, there's this weird thing that's like, we're not doing that. We're not going to invest all our time trying to figure that out. Like, we'll let a guy at Houdini just you know, build it up.
Here
and
you
try and figure
go.
it out.
You figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't have anything in pipeline built out to do that. Like you need to figure it out. So.
Right. So it's cool.
So,
it's really cool. Well, cool, Eddie. Thank you so much for being on and, letting us, pick your brain and find out what's going on in that world and the industry. So it's really awesome talking to you, and congratulations on 14 years at DD. So.
Well, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. And I haven't talked to you, and it seems like just forever.
It's been a long time. A long time. And we used to hang out a lot. So
we used to. Hey, we did. Yeah, there was a time when we were hanging out a lot. Yeah.
Yep. So it's good talking to you for sure. But awesome.
All right, great. Well, I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm happy that I was able to contribute in some way. I hope it was okay. I think
was
this
great.
is the only podcast I've ever done before. So.
All right. Well, you'll see. It's gonna be awesome. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Chris.